If I were moving to Austin in 2026, I wouldn't start by picking a neighborhood. That's actually backwards. Instead, I'd use 5 specific filters that help narrow down the areas of Austin that would actually fit my lifestyle. Because step 3 is usually where most buyers realize they committed to an area that doesn't meet their needs and fit their daily life. So if I were starting from scratch, the first thing I'd look at isn't the house, it's actually my radius. So let's pull up a map and dig a little bit deeper. All right, step 1 is the commute reality, because before you start looking at houses, lot sizes, schools, home prices, you kind of want to understand how Austin actually moves. So I want you to ask yourself a few simple questions to start. First one is, where do you work most often? Second question is, how often do you go downtown? And the third question is, how often do you fly? Let's start pretty basic with those 3 things. So I want to show you. Question number 1, where do you work most often? If you are someone who works in downtown Austin, you want to understand if you are going to be 20, 25 miles from the city, what that commute looks like on a day-to-day basis. Living a few miles, maybe 5 to 10 miles south of Austin or just north of Austin is a much bigger difference from a commute standpoint than if you're living up in Georgetown or Liberty Hill. Now, the good thing is that there's options pretty much around the city in either direction, north, south, east, or west, if you work downtown to kind of cut down on that commute. But let's say you work at the Domain. If you are in tech, this is like the mini downtown north of downtown Austin, the big tech hub. If you're working at the Domain, or if you're working in one of the north tech companies, I would highly encourage you to consider staying north. We've had clients that have looked into moving to Dripping Springs, moving to South Austin, and making that commute daily to the Domain. And I could tell you, maybe at noon on a Saturday, it's something that's palatable. The drive isn't too bad, but you throw rush hour in, if you're doing that drive every day, you could be looking at over an hour. Making that south to north trek could be a big mistake. Now, the second question I asked you was, how often are you going to downtown? Because you don't just have to work in downtown to enjoy downtown Austin. So many people move here for the city life and entertainment. Now, if you're only going downtown once a month, you don't need to prioritize this when you're trying to figure out where to live. But if you're someone who values the Ladybird hike and bike trail, wants to, go to Zilker Park a lot, Barton Springs, wants to just be close to downtown, well, then maybe it's something you need to tighten up that radius so you're not sitting in the car for 45 minutes to an hour every time you want to have a good time in Austin. Now, that other question I asked you was, how often do you fly? So we've got Austin Bergstrom Airport down here, ABIA, kind of do a little zoomed out look. So it's in southeast Austin. So you kind of got to think, all right, if I'm commuting to the airport, let's say you fly once a week, you need to heavily consider where you're going to be in relationship to the airport, because someone living up in Northwest Austin, or maybe you're out in Lakeway, in Bee Cave area, way to the west, making that trek across the city several times a month can be kind of a beatdown. But maybe you're someone who takes a couple trips a year, doesn't fly much. Having a long commute once or twice throughout the course of the year isn't a big deal. Well, you don't need to prioritize being that close to the airport. And this is funny because the neighborhood that I live in Circle C down here, it's about a 18-minute, clocked it 18 minutes, so we call it 18, 20 minutes to get to the airport. And I keep thinking, I don't want to move further because it's so nice not having to rush, but I only fly a few times a year. So I've kind of bumped that down on my priority list because there's things I want way more than being just a few minutes closer to the airport. Now, having a basic understanding of the highways in Austin, you don't need to memorize them. Just have a basic understanding. We got I-35 running north and south through downtown Austin, big congestion point. On the west side of Austin, you have MoPac, also known as Loop 1. If you live and work, or if you live in South or Southwest Austin, this is going to be your lifeline. And taking it up north, MoPac can be much less congested at times, definitely has its traffic moments, but much less congested than I-35. There are plenty of times where Austin can feel like a pretty small city, but once you throw in those drive times, it can expand rapidly. And I can tell you, as someone who spends a good amount of time in the car driving around Austin, we had a client that bought recently up in the Liberty Hill area, Liberty Hill, Georgetown, right on the border, and they didn't expect to be commuting downtown. They were remote at the time, and then all of a sudden work said, hey, we need you back downtown more often. I don't think it was 5 days a week. I think it was a few days a week, but that was a big lifestyle sacrifice and something that you need to consider if you're making the move. But commute alone doesn't narrow down Austin enough. The next filter matters even more. All right, so the next thing I do, I break Austin into 4 macro lifestyle zones. Now, this isn't breaking it into neighborhoods. These are zones, and don't get too fixated on the boundaries here because it'll give you a general idea of what to expect in different parts of the city and surrounding areas. And it's funny because this is where so many buyers realize that they don't want what they thought they wanted. So the first macro zone is going to be our urban core. So if you're thinking of moving to downtown Austin, Clarksville, Tarrytown up here, if you want to be in 78704 or maybe Hyde Park, these are kind of the trendier areas where people are valuing, culture and entertainment, food, maybe walkability, and just overall proximity to downtown Austin. Now, this is where people usually say they want to be until they see the square footage that their budget actually buys. And the conversations we pretty much hear on repeat because buyers have that emotional attachment to being close to downtown, being in the mix, but then they see the trade-offs that they have to make to land there. Now, let me give you a great example. So we had some clients that recently moved here. They found us on YouTube, and one of the things they told us, they wanted to be central. They wanted to be close proximity to downtown and all the things that the city has to offer. So they were looking in areas like Allendale, in Brentwood, Crestview up here, because those are all great neighborhoods. Everything they seemed to be finding, it just wasn't clicking. And they loved the area. They loved the walkability, what was around it. But there were too many sacrifices with the house, whether it was the updates in the house, the size of the house, or the lot sizes of these houses, that we took them down a little bit further south into an area that they could arguably be just as close to downtown. It didn't have the walkability to shops and restaurants, but again, short drive into downtown to get there. And they checked way more boxes for honestly a lower price point just by giving up a few things. So again, being in the urban core is great. I love Austin. I love most of these surrounding neighborhoods, but understand the trade-offs that you're making to be in the urban core, and you can decide if that's for you. All right, zone 2 is going to be our South Austin lifestyle zone. So I'm going to pop it up on the map here. And this is where you're looking at South Congress over here, a neighborhood like Circle C Ranch, Sunset Valley, which is in this area, and just the overall Southwest Austin area. So think down here, more space, established neighborhoods, but still that Austin vibe. One thing to consider here is there's going to be a little bit more limited new supply. So not as much new construction. Now, if you go down here to Southeast Austin, so this is where you will have some more new builds. But if you really want that kind of Austin moving into the kind of hill country feel, established neighborhood feel, you're going to be west of I-35 right here. Now, a lot of people that land here, like the clients I just told you about that were looking up in the kind of central Austin and landed in this area, people still come here and say, okay, this still feels like Austin. And it's actually the area that I live. So having a family there now, I moved from closer to downtown. It really checks all the boxes, blends everything for me because I have the neighborhood feel. I'm in Circle C Ranch, a well-established neighborhood. You can find amenities down here, but I'm close to retail like Costco and easily accessible into downtown. I told you 18 minutes to the airport. And then if you want to go out to the hill country, for, go to Dripping Springs, to a brewery, distillery out this way, it's so accessible to that. So South Austin to me, I feel like is a sleeper and a lot of people overlook, might be a little biased, but kind of gives you the lifestyle in a nutshell. All right, zone 3 is going to be our hill country zone. And this is out west. So you look at the topography of Austin, and out west is where the hills are. So you're looking at Lakeway, Bee Caves, Dripping Springs, out into Spicewood if you want to be in our hill country zone. Now, this is going to be for the buyers that are wanting to value bigger lots, maybe some privacy, beautiful views, rolling hills. If you value those things, then the hill country zone is kind of where you need to focus. Now, here's an interesting thing to consider is that a lot of our buyers who have ended up in Dripping Springs were living very close to downtown, and they realized they needed to get just a little bit out of the mix. The mix was too much for them. Maybe it's a stage of life, or they just kind of got burned out or realized that they weren't going into downtown as much for food, for entertainment. So being out in a suburb was much more appealing for those things, the hills and all the things that I just mentioned. Now, on the flip side, we have a buyer right now that we're working with that we showed a couple homes in Dripping Springs, and it was on like kind of the eastern edge, so right on the border of Austin and Dripping Springs. And the wife works up at the Domain. And at first she thought she was okay with it because she was doing the drive at times that weren't peak times on the weekends. And then we showed her a house right after work hours, and it took her about an hour to get there, and they quickly nixed Dripping Springs off their list. So really consider step one that I showed you with the different commute times and accessibility points when you're deciding if the Hill Country zone is the one for you. Our fourth zone is going to be our North Growth Corridor. So showing it here on the map, this is where you're looking at Cedar Park, Leander, Liberty Hill, Round Rock, Georgetown, Pflugerville, all the main popular suburbs up north that you heard of are going to be part of our growth corridor zone. Now, what can you expect in these areas? For the most part, newer homes, master plan communities, more rooftops in the neighborhoods closer together, but definitely more value per square foot than you're getting in some of the other areas I showed you already. Most of the new construction, not all of the new construction, most of the new construction we're seeing around Austin is happening up this way, which is why during the pandemic, we saw things absolutely explode in this area. Okay, so there you have your four kind of zones. You'll see there's a lot of spots that aren't covered. That's okay. I said don't obsess over the areas that these cover. This is to give you a general idea of which part of the city might fit your lifestyle. But now, once you've chosen your zone, budget becomes the next most important factor. All right, step 3 is our pricing buckets. Now, instead of obsessing over neighborhoods, I like to see what lifestyle your budget actually buys. All right, the first bucket is under $600,000. And in our urban core, so Central Austin, what is that going to buy you? Well, you're probably looking at a much smaller, older home or maybe a condo. Take that budget down here to our South Austin zone, and you're probably looking at something a little bit smaller, maybe under 2,000 square feet, or a little bit older home that might need some updates. In our North Corridor, this is where you're going to start seeing those square footage options really open up and lots of opportunity for beautiful new construction. Under 600,000 in our Hill Country zone, you're likely going to be much further out, or you'll be compromising on size to get a little bit closer. What we find is that 600,000 or under in the Austin area, you're likely trading proximity for space. All right, the next bucket is going to be our 600,000 to 900,000, and this is where most relocation buyers end up landing. So in Central Austin, in our urban core, you're still probably getting into an older home in that price point. You might find a freestanding condo that's a little bit newer, but you could still get in a great location in some of those top neighborhoods that I showed you earlier in the video. In the 600 to 900,000 range in the South Austin zone, this is where options really start opening up. You can get something really cool in that South Congress pocket I showed you earlier that's super close to downtown, or maybe get something bigger, updated, maybe a pool that's closer to Circle C Ranch or the Western Oaks area. Again, our North Growth Corridor up here, now you're finding way more square footage. You can get your 3,000 plus square foot home, lots of new construction options in some great master plan communities filled with amenities. And out in the Hill Country, now we're starting to enter that view territory where you might get a home with beautiful scenic views. Lot sizes still are going to be on the smaller end in that 600 to 900 range, but some beautiful options for homes, whether you want to be out a little bit removed away from people, or you want to be in a master plan community like Sweetwater out toward Lakeway, or maybe in Headwaters in Dripping Springs. So I can't stress enough, if you're in the middle of that $750,000, what you get up here is way different, drastically different than what you'll get in the urban core or even in South Austin. All right, the next bucket is going to be our 900 plus bucket. And this is where you start to see meaningful options really open up pretty much everywhere across Austin. All right, now depending on how high above that 900,000, if we're talking $1 million or maybe you say $2 million, being in the central core, our urban core zone, you're still competing for a lot of scarce inventory in that price point. Again, depending on how high you can go, but great options for you. They really start opening up over $1 million in the urban core. Now in the South Austin zone, this is where you're going to start getting some of those more premium options in the better neighborhoods out there. You could be a little pickier when you're above 900 into the millions down in South Austin. And similarly, in our North Growth Corridor, now you're getting some of the best options for new construction, kind of moving into that luxury territory over there. You'll see some builders put out a more luxury product than others, and you could really pick whatever you want once you get 900 plus up in the North Growth corridors. And I would say 900 plus out in the hill country into Dripping Springs, into Lakeway. Now you can really choose those premium lots, the views, the space. You can now pair those things with the house that's also updated, turnkey, ready to go. I would say when you move into that 900 plus territory, that bucket, you're now choosing more experience versus just a house. Now, I can't stress this enough. Austin doesn't have clean lines in terms of where you could spend under 900 or under 600, which is why I'm kind of breaking these down into macro zones. All right, moving on to step 4. This is going to be scarcity versus expansion. So once I've narrowed down my zone and understand what my budget can realistically buy, the next thing I want to look at is future supply. Because when you buy a home, you're not just buying it today. You want to know what's happening 5-10 years down the line. And this is where a lot of smart buyers skip a step. You know, looking at Austin, there's still a lot of parts where there's very little land to build on. And on the flip side, areas where thousands of homes can be built, and you're going to have not only construction, but lots of homes to compete with down the line. And I do like to think this difference matters way more than people think. So let's pull up our map again. So back on the map, we're going to take a look at our urban core. Told you some of the top neighborhoods that are in there. Now, what we mostly see from a development standpoint in here is redevelopment. So maybe lots that were scraped, old teardowns, and new homes are being built. Not quite as much land to build new construction on in this area. Now, what this does, it creates natural scarcity and in turn helps drive up prices. But for someone looking to get in as an entry level, there's a much higher barrier to entry in the urban core. So in this pocket, you're paying for proximity and land constraint. Pretty much the reason why people say in central Austin, you're going to see the market react much differently than out in the suburbs. Now let's shift down to South Austin. Now, South Austin's a little bit more constrained, land constrained than people actually think. There is some redevelopment happening. However, when you compare that to that large-scale expansion that we see up north, it's not even close. Now, I will point to an area that you do see a lot of new construction and a lot of expansion is southeast. I mentioned earlier getting some new construction, maybe in a neighborhood like Easton Park. Now, you got to understand over here that there's still thousands more homes that are going to be built in a neighborhood like Easton Park, which is down here in Southeast Austin. And if you buy a new construction home or even a resale home, you're going to be competing with new construction for several years down the line. But when we go into kind of the traditional areas I told you that are more considered southwest Austin, inventory is definitely more limited when it comes to competing with new construction. Most of the competition there is going to be on resale homes. So you could look at this pocket as an area that has a little bit more stability long term, and it's highly unlikely that you're going to, hear some big announcement of a 3,000 home community being built in the Southwest Austin area because, quite frankly, the land just doesn't exist for that. Okay, now let's look at our North Corridor, and this is where a lot of the large scale expansion is happening in the Austin area. I'm talking new master plan communities, new phases of existing communities, just lots of homes being built over here. And with all the homes that are being built, a lot of retail on top of that. And the growth isn't a bad thing. It's bringing new schools, it's bringing new infrastructure, new amenities to the area. A lot of places that, a lot of the popular spots that were in closer to Austin that might not be able to afford being in Austin anymore have moved up north and more to the outskirts and bringing great food and entertainment options up to this North Corridor. You'll find that you're probably going to have the most options if you're looking in this north area, whether you want resale or new construction, and then a wide range of sizes and styles. And then we have our hill country zone where this is where you're going to see a lot of those areas are geographically constrained. You just simply can't build, but there are pockets in here where new construction developments are coming up or phases of existing developments. We're seeing a lot of it out in Dripping Springs. I would say more so than Lakeway. There was a big boom of new construction over the last 5-10 years in the Lakeway area, but you're going to find a little bit more of that in Dripping Springs right now. And this is why when we're taking clients around, we're evaluating neighborhoods not just by do they have nice houses, do they have nice amenities, but what is around here, what is going to affect your future, not only appreciation, but just your future lifestyle. So think about it like this. If you're maybe buying your forever home and proximity, maybe stability are more important to you, then scarcity might be the driver of your decision. But if you're buying new construction, maybe you want tons of amenities and growth, then finding an area with more expansion might work in your favor. But now let's look at the final step so you can determine if you're actually going to enjoy your day-to-day life. All right, step 5 is our daily life test. Now this is going to be the last step before you determine if you're actually going to enjoy where you live. Because up to this point, we looked at commute, zones, budget, and future supply, which are all going to be important, but none of this matters if your daily life just kind of feels off. So before I ever pick a neighborhood, I like to run what I call the daily life test. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to imagine a normal day of the week. Let's pick Tuesday. Not a Saturday, not a holiday, just a normal Tuesday. Think, what time do I wake up? Where's the first place I'm driving in the morning? How long does that drive feel 5 days a week, doing it consistently? Where am I going to get groceries? How often am I making that trip to the grocery store? If you have kids, how far is school drop off? What does that routine look like in the morning? Now let's stop and think about those last two for a second, grocery store and school. So I live about 5 minutes, less than 5 minutes from the grocery store, which I have totally underestimated how convenient that is, how amazing it is. There's nothing like getting home from the store, or you're making burgers and you forget you have ketchup. You realize you can't go to the grocery store because it's 15-20 minutes away. Well, having one very close to you, while it shouldn't totally be the decision maker when looking for a home, it's definitely something to highly consider. Then you look at schools. I live also just a couple minutes from school, and I love walking or riding bikes with my girls to school. Now, on certain days, I don't like doing that. And on the days when you drive, you go to drop them at school, they forgot their lunch, they forgot their water, and you got to turn home and go get it. Having those things close by really makes a big difference when you're determining where you want to live. So again, these might not be deal breakers for you, but just things to consider when going through your daily life, trying to figure out what it's going to look like where you're living. I like to say you're not just buying a house, you're buying repetition, and that repetition is what can either cause you to be satisfied and happy or kind of regret where you lived and want to move. And I've seen it on both sides. I've had clients who fell in love with a house, and then they realize once they break down their daily routine, it just doesn't make sense. And on the flip side, we've had clients that have overlooked areas, but then when we look at how it fits into their daily life, it checks the boxes, and in most cases they end up there versus the area where they loved the house but didn't love the lifestyle. And to be honest, most buyers skip this step because it might not be as exciting to think of as the floor plan or square footage of a house. But I can say it usually is the difference between loving where you live and just having that feeling of being unsettled, and sometimes you don't know why. So once I've run these 5 filters, commute, lifestyle zones, budget reality, future supply, and the daily life test, now I'm ready to start zooming into specific neighborhoods. It's no longer a guessing game of what neighborhood might work for me. Now you're doing it intentionally, and you're not going to waste as much time. And after looking at this, if you're not sure which zone matches your daily life, that's usually where a conversation with our team helps to walk you through the steps and help you narrow down those zones and then find a good neighborhood for you. Now, if you're leaning toward maybe the hill country, I would definitely recommend checking out our Dripping Springs vlog tour, or even just check out our video where we ranked all of the Austin suburbs from best to worst. Those are all great starting points for you. We'll catch you on the next one.